Hello and welcome to Economic Forum, a program where we discuss various issues affecting our economy in Zimbabwe. These can be issues to do with manufacturing, with mining, agriculture, tourism, and many others. We discuss them here on Economic Forum. My name is John Masuku. Towards the end of last year, we discussed with Dr. Prosper Chitambara about 2022 in retrospect. And he told us about some of the things that had taken place during that year. But today we want to look at 2023, what we should expect in the area of economics. But we cannot do that without revisiting very briefly 2022. And we're going to do that with Victor Boroma, who is an economic analyst. Welcome, Victor, to Economic Forum.
Thank you so much. Good day to your viewers and listeners.
Yes. We can start from where Dr. Chitambara left, where he was reviewing 2022. But otherwise, our discussion today in looking at 2023 is going to be based on the State of the Nation address, which was given by His Excellency, the President, Comrade Emmerson Mnangagwa, as well as the budget speech, which was given by the Minister, Professor Mthuli Ncube. So, starting from where we looked at 2022 in retrospect.
2022 was quite a good year in terms of macroeconomic development. A number of sectors in the economy actually managed to tick the box in terms of economic growth. And if you look at the shift in terms of the economy, Zimbabwe is totally shifted from basically most of the contribution to the economy being agrarian to now the mining sector taking over, the wholesale and retail taking over, and also the resurgence in terms of manufacturing, though slightly different from what it used to be. So if we look at the key drivers of economic growth last year, you highlighted a lot of projects that are ongoing in the mining sector. So we look at gold. Obviously, gold is very key. As a commodity, is one of the key contributors to economic growth in the country. And it earns the country about $1 billion in terms of foreign currency earnings. So last year alone, there were a lot of projects that actually were completed and that were actually started. We look at Caledonia Mining, the acquisition of Bilboes Gold, and actually Caledonia Mining being now the biggest producer of gold in the country. So if we look at the mining sector in general, we have got over 4.4 billion, obviously, in terms of foreign currency earnings that are going into the mining sector. So that's very significant. And why is that there was growth in that particular sector of the economy? If you look at the bullish outlook in terms of commodity prices in the global market, and that particular atmosphere started, when COVID started. So investors had to look at, safe havens in terms of investment. And mining commodities are very safe. Silver, chrome, gold, platinum, lithium, all those Zimbabwe can be able to produce those particular commodities. And that's the reason why there's been a growth in terms of mining exports. So now, if we look at the total, foreign currency earnings for last year, Zimbabwe managed actually to get about 11.6 billion. And that's a very significant growth from around 9.7 billion that was recorded in 2021. So when you've got a lot of foreign currency earnings, it does derive or it does, feed into demand, effective demand into the economy. Now, that's why you see even the manufacturing sector itself is now contributing about 16% to the economic output. There was also growth. A lot of Zimbabwean products are actually in local retail shops. They're actually taking the space as opposed to what it used to be.
How about infrastructure? It's something that we also touched on as ongoing. Just, the buildings, the road constructions and so forth. Are we going to see that going on?
Yeah. So there are two aspects to it. In terms of, obviously, gross capital formation, from what government outlays in terms of public infrastructure, a lot is definitely going on. We have got the Robert Mugabe International Airport expansion. We also have got airstrips in Bumi. And also we've got the expansion of Joshua Nkomo Airport. We have got also the new Parliament building. Obviously, that's an infrastructure project. Mbudzi Interchange, Harare to Bay Bridge Highway. We also had the Bay Bridge border post upgrade. So if you look at the rehabilitation of that particular infrastructure, there's a lot of funding that is going on. And the good thing is that it has got a knock-on effect to other sectors of the economy. Obviously, the providers of services, the financial sector, obviously where that funding is going through. So it has got, a beneficial effect to the rest of the economy actually.
What were the other factors, natural causes and others, that could have affected our economy and are likely to do so in 2023?
Climate effects, we are not immune to them. So, rainfall patterns have totally changed. And we now realize a lot of rainfall in the beginning of the year as opposed to what it used to be. We used to receive a lot of rain close to the end of the year, November, December, but now it has totally changed. Obviously, it does affect our agriculture. Why? Because if you look at it, 60% of our agriculture is rain-fed. So if you've got slightly less than average rainfall, it does affect agricultural productivity. Then secondly, in terms of water itself, 70% of our grid power comes from Kariba Power Station. So if you have less rainfall, then it does obviously affect in terms of your capacity to produce power.
How about the effects of the slowing down in other countries, in other regions and so forth? How far are we affected or were we affected last year to the extent that is going to proceed in 2023?
I would say the major impact in terms of global or regional, economic developments, obviously that come to Zimbabwe, we mainly do with South Africa, and what we experience are pass-through effects of whatever affects the South African economy. Why? Because 50% of what we export goes to South Africa, and 62% of our official imports come from South Africa before we actually talk about whatever is smuggled into the country. So if you look at what's happening in Russia, Ukraine, China, USA trade wars, they are definitely affecting South Africa. But at the same time, there's also something positive that is coming. The global demand for coal, obviously South Africa is benefiting. You actually notice that there are a lot of coal investments that are being done in Zimbabwe coming from South Africa because of the high demand for coal. So I think we did not fare quite badly in terms of responding to regional or global pass-on effects.
That's Victor Boroma, who is an economic analyst. We are looking at 2023, what are the prospects? But before delving deeper into that, we looked at 2022, what we are carrying over from that situation into the present situation. So join us in the second segment, where then we shall be looking at the highlights of the State of Nation address by His Excellency the President, what we derive from there going forward, as well as the budget speech by the Minister of Finance, Professor Mthuli Ncube. So join us in the second segment. We are now in the second segment of Economic Forum, where we are discussing the forecast of our economy in 2023. And we're basing that on the State of the Nation address last year in 2022 by His Excellency, the President of the Republic of Zimbabwe, Comrade Emmerson Mnangagwa, as well as the budget speech that was presented by the Minister of Finance, Professor Mthuli Ncube. And our guest here is Victor Boroma, who is an economic analyst. Probably the best thing to do, Victor, is to start with the highlights of both those two important national speeches.
Great. All right. So if you look at the State of the Nation address, and that was presented by the Office of the President, key is that obviously he laid out the vision for the economy for 2023. And obviously that vision borrows very much from Vision 2030, how the country would need to progress in terms of economic sectors to be able to attain the Vision 2030 goals. So the key thing that he highlighted, obviously, he touched on, is that the economy was actually experiencing some level of macroeconomic stability because of what the policies that had been implemented by the central bank. So what had happened is that prior to the SONA address was that the central bank had maintained interest rates at around 200%. At the same time, there was also a lot of overnight accommodation and mopping up of excess liquidity in the economy. So at that particular time, there was stability in terms of on the foreign exchange market. So he highlighted that it was important that that particular stability in terms of foreign exchange was maintained. Then he also talked about the growth in the mining sector in terms of investments. Obviously, he highlighted that most of our foreign investment is still very much biased towards the extractive industry, which is mining. And the vision was that there is need, obviously, for policy incentives to ensure that there is value addition of those particular minerals. If you look at the lithium, mining sector, which is getting a lot of West attention because of electric cars, he talked about the need for beneficiation close to source. Then he also spoke about agriculture, how the government was going to target over 3 million farmers in terms of availing agricultural inputs and the presidential input scheme, and obviously the target crops. He spoke about soya, he spoke about wheat, maize, which are largely and small grains, which are largely some of the crops that drive the manufacturing sector in the local economy. Then he also talked about what the government was doing in order to obviously smoothen the business climate, obviously in terms of the regulations that are obviously in place at the moment, in terms of investment, in terms of dividend repatriation and capital movement. So those are some of the highlights and aspirations that the Office of the President discussed in the State of the Nation address.
Do you see most of those things going forward in 2023, or some of them are done and we're looking at new things?
Yeah, a lot of those particular interventions, projects and aspirations carry into 2023. Why do I say so? Number one, if we look at the mining sector, it's capital intensive. It's a long game. If you look at the Mvuma steel plant, production is only expected to start towards the tail end of 2023. Obviously, that particular plant is going to take a lot of power, actually, over 250 megawatts, on a single plant. So that means there are a lot of preparations that need to be done for all these projects to come on board. If you look at the Goromonzi lithium plant, it's also going to take a significant amount of power, over 30 megawatts. So all those projects are ongoing. Some of them might not even actually be fulfilled or be finished in the current year, but there are some of the projects that are nearing completion. If you look at Hwange 7, Hwange 8, we are actually undergoing tests which were supposed to be done in last year, but obviously they've carried forward into 2023. So some of the projects will definitely come to fruition in 2023, but some of them obviously will spill over into the coming years.
Listening to His Excellency presenting the State of the Nation address, what did you have in mind with regards to Vision 2030 as well as the National Development Strategy? Did you still feel that we are on course, or there may be other things or impediments that would derail us?
When you look at Vision 2030, over the top, what do we need to achieve year in, year out so that we achieve Vision 2030? We are still 7 years out before we reach 2030. But key is that the economy has to grow by at least 8%. That's positive GDP growth every year for us to be able to attain that particular vision. But if I look at it, to say that we are derailed, definitely no. There is progress. But what I would say is that the progress is very, very gradual. It's very slow. Obviously, there are a lot of things that would need to be done, or that you would wish could be fast-tracked so that at least, that growth is attained. Number one, obviously, that comes to mind is that if you look at our foreign exchange regulations, there is a lot that needs to be done to ensure that foreign investors, even local investors, can be able to move capital into the country and out of the country. Why do I say so? If you look at it, we discussed that mining is very capital intensive, manufacturing is also capital intensive. We need a lot of beneficiation and value addition. And some of that particular capital to actually fund and sponsor those projects is not in the country. Then if you also look at the issue of power, there were years when investment into power projects was actually very subdued. So we actually need to improve investment into the generation of power. Infrastructure projects were also running very low because we have to ensure that each budget, there's over 30% of government revenues that are directed towards infrastructure projects. So obviously, because of shortage of funds, some of the challenges that were happening, inflation, low collections in terms of taxes, some of those particular targets in terms of government expenditure are definitely hard to come by.
That's Victor Boroma, our economic analyst, and today we are focusing what is going to happen economically in the year 2023, and he has just been outlining or highlighting some of the issues that were presented during the State of the Nation address by His Excellency the President. So join us in the third and final segment of today's Economic Forum, where then we are going to be looking at what the budget statement was all about and what it means to the 2023 forecast. We are now in the third and final segment of Economic Forum, where we are focusing the year 2023. What's in it with regards to our economy? Now we are going to be looking at the budget speech, what the Minister of Finance said, and what it means to our forecast. Back to our economic analyst, Victor Boroma. Now, what were the highlights? Now, there should be lots of figures here because it's the budget and it's the Minister of Finance. What did the Minister of Finance say, and what is the impact going forward?
The key highlights from the budget, obviously, is we have to look at the total resource outlay, and it was a 4.5 trillion budget in terms of...
Trillion Zim dollars?
Zimbabwean dollars, definitely. So then in terms of government collections, the government expects to collect roughly about 3.9 trillion. So when you look at those particular figures, the difference or the variance there, which is about 0.6 trillion, obviously is going to be financed by VFX bonds, is going to be financed by treasury bills, and obviously borrowing in the local market. Then some of the key things that obviously go to the bread and butter issues. Value-added tax was adjusted from the COVID era, 14.5% to 15%. So if you look at the SADC average, which is around 15.2%, so it means Zimbabwe is actually in line in terms of value-added tax. If you also look at intermediated money transfer tax, it was amended from 4% to 2% with effect from 1 January 2023. So those are some of the key highlights in terms of taxation and also in terms of the budget outlay itself. But in terms of allocations, just as it is year in, year out, most of the allocations obviously went to the Ministry of Education, Ministry of Health and Child Welfare, and Ministry of Agriculture. So those were the key three biggest recipients in terms of budget outlay. Then,
but as an economist, were you happy with those being given the priority, or there are others which you think should have been pushed in?
To be honest, budget votes themselves do not mean much. What means much is the actual allocation. So when the funds do come in, when taxes come in, obviously into the coffers, how is the allocation being done? So what we would want, obviously, from an economic point of view, we would want that most of the allocations should go towards where most of those particular budget votes are. So if you look at the prior years, it has not happened like that. So that's where you realize that if you look at the Ministry of Health and Child Care, out of the obviously allocated or discussed or communicated figure, they only get probably 25 to 30%. So it's not much about what is said in the budget, but it's actually the actual allocation itself. Then obviously some of the things that we look at is about 52% of the budget revenues were earmarked towards civil service, which is actually recurring expenditure. But then if you look at public service delivery in education, in healthcare, even policing itself, there's quite low morale when it comes to remuneration. So obviously our aspiration is that there has to be, finality in terms of how civil servants are remunerated. It has to be sustainable. The government collects revenues and obviously civil servants are happy, because what it does is that it helps to resuscitate the credit market. It helps to obviously induce demand in the economy. which goes to the retail sector, wholesale sector, in other parts of the economy, obviously. So those are some of the key highlights from the budget that I can think of over the top of my head.
What do you think was in the mind of the professor when he was making these allocations? Was it mainly to concentrate on the social services so that people are happy, or was it to fulfill some of the things that have been outstanding in the past?
To be very fair, he has got when you're presenting a budget, you have to satisfy a lot of parties that make provisions. If I just remember or recall, in terms of actual proposals, different ministries, different commissions came up with proposals that totaled over 8 trillion. So for you, obviously, to reduce that particular figure to 4.5 trillion is a Herculean figure. Who do you actually prioritize? So I think over the top, the minister, number one, is how do we ensure that we collect as much taxes as possible to meet the obligations in terms of public service? Then number two, how do we ensure that there is sustainability? One of the key issues that he obviously presented was actually there was a waiver that had been done in terms of customs duty for fast-moving consumer goods. So he obviously listened to the industry that the playing field was no longer level. There was a lot of dumping that was happening, imports of fast-moving consumer goods that was hitting the manufacturing sector. He also had to listen. IMT tax review downwards from 4 to 2%, value-added tax from 14 to 15. So it's a balancing act if you actually look at get as much revenue as possible and ensure that public service is delivered.
In fact, while you are there, Victor, in the last year, his ministry issued quite a lot of statements with regards to financial discipline and so forth. Is it something that he also mentioned in the budget speech? Because we were seeing quite a number of statements, some of them issued by the permanent secretary in the ministry and so forth, regarding how government money has to be spent.
Yeah, he definitely mentioned it. Obviously, he spoke about the issue of tendering, how there has to be discipline, obviously adherence to market prices that are there, because there's been a tendency from various suppliers to government that whenever they are supplying something to government, obviously they use market prices times 3, times 10, and it obviously it does not deliver value to the common man. It does not deliver value to the government. So he definitely talked about it, and he also discussed the issue of ensuring that all the funds that are collected by the government are efficiently used in whatever they are. So if you make a proposal to the treasury, make sure that the funds that you get are utilized in that particular manner, so that when it comes to auditing, there are no gaps that are there. And that's one of the recommendations that obviously came from the Auditor General, and it's also contained in the budget.
The future of the gold coins, anything mentioned about it?
In the budget, it was mentioned that obviously gold coins are actually working in order to ensure that, number one, the Reserve Bank can be able to mop up excess liquidity in the economy. Because when you buy gold coins, obviously you're parting away with your money. So that means less money circulating in the economy, since we've got a very big challenge in terms of money supply in the economy. Then obviously, as a safe haven in terms of investment, it does give investors an option. One of the key issues that we have got in the local economy is that we do not have as many safe havens on the financial markets. So when you get excess Zimbabwean dollars, obviously the option A for most people is to buy US dollars. So how do you have a secondary option that can be able to give you a safe haven? And that's where gold coins come in.
Victor, you have a few seconds to say, this is election year, and how does that affect all those things presented by His Excellency as well as the Minister of Finance, in a few seconds?
All right. So obviously, in terms of aspirations, blueprints, we do not fall short there. What needs to be done is that there is need for a stable, economic environment, and there is need, obviously, for inclusive governance, and there is need for peace in order to be able to achieve those particular economic, aspirations.
Victor Boroma, who is an economic analyst, he was giving us the focus for the year 2023, where he was looking at what happened in 2022 and what do we carry forward, as well as analyzing the state of the nation addressed by His Excellency, the President, as well as the budget speech. So on behalf of Victor Boroma, our economic analyst, as well as the production crew, this is John Masubu.